Thank you. The only thing about one of your poems going to the moon is you feel like giving up writing. You've reached the peak. And it was an odd thing too, because it's always a poem you never think should go to the moon. Does anybody actually need to stand up and stretch? You know, like we're in the age now where entertainers need to look after their audiences, right? So by all means, if you do. The last time I was in a room like this was in Copenhagen, and they actually had to part the audience to get me in. So here in Canada, it's a very remarkable situation to see a full room for poetry and such. So Poetic Attention, hey, from Stafford. Do you know Stafford at all? And he has a poem where he's driving along, perhaps you know this, and he comes upon a doe that's been hit perhaps by the car previous, and he doesn't know what to do. So he pulls his car over, and the poem is all about this great human man stopped and not knowing what to do. So when he puts his hand on the doe's belly, of course, she is pregnant. So what he ends up doing is sitting there in the light, the red light of his taillights, the white of the exhaust, and pushes her over the bank. So I think a lot about that at points where, why am I being stopped? What is stopping me? And every time I think of that and I pay attention, guess what I get? Maybe a word, maybe a phrase, but what I call this lovingly disturbing situation that can kind of take you out of your life in a necessary way. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professor. I've lived my whole life as somebody that's had to make paychecks and tolerate very lousy, soul-sucking jobs. But you know what? I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I once met Earl Birney. Do you know the Canadian poet Earl Birney? I once met his wife, and this was long after Esther Birney. This was long after Earl was dead. And she said he would have liked to meet you just because you have held down these jobs somehow and able to tolerate a world that way and at the same time write poetry. So that's where I come from. And here it is 40 years later. I have this little book called Parental Forest. Now, this is actually a publisher here in your great city, AOS Publishing. And the thing about AOS is there's no government money. What, no jaws hitting the floor? So it was one of the reasons that I was curious. I come from a background of DIY, and because of that, I'm not afraid to self-publish. And really the nice thing about self-publishing is whatever money you make, guess whose pocket it ends up in? Yours. And I'm telling you, if anybody's publishing right now in Canada, you know how tough the situation is. I just had a manuscript, here's an example, if you don't know. Just had a manuscript turned down by Guernica, who's a former publisher of mine, so I'm not part of their corral. And they had 70 submissions. Their window is only from the beginning of February now to the end of February. It used to last from January to April. They had 70 submissions and 3 made it. So they're really hurting. And a lot of the major poetry publishers are really hurting here in Canada. So I've lived through a lot of different ups and downs in a lot of different places and watched these changes go on. So I thought at this point, I'd like to have this book come out because it is specifically nature work. And I wanted to compile that. There's work that goes back as far as 2010 in here. So I wanted to challenge myself also to compile. And if you've ever sat and tried to put a book together, you'll know what I mean, especially if it's a selected or a collected, if you're that far along the path. It is not an easy thing. But even an individual collection can be very difficult. So I had a lot of older work going, yo, back here. Work that I've totally forgotten. So to read that work is some of what I'm going to do today. So it's a nice little out on the edge of the diving board above the empty pool scenario, which I think most poets should relish the chance to go to, unless they're a little too comfortable. So I'll start. It hasn't really been mentioned much over the last few days. I know it wasn't mentioned last night. I read at the Lawn Chair Soiree. I just love that name. And if you haven't been, please attend it, because it's an amazing evening down at 1444 Union Street. So, the other thing too, that with this work, I get a chance to read a poem that's part of the National Poetry Month. Any League of Canadian Poet members here? No. Oh, one at the back. Full member or associate?
Full member.
Ah, bravo. So yeah, they have a theme of weather this year with their National Poetry Month. So I have a poem that I think will probably allow me to be part of that. So I appreciate the League. I'm at a point if I don't know if I'm going to remain a member, because I think they have too many members. And it's damn hard to get funding for your readings now. And I'm not used to that. So this is a poem that was written between March 12th and 18 during the worldwide outbreak of the coronavirus. And it was a little barbecue place that I could sit and drink these wonderful IPA beers. And it was 5 minutes near my home. So I attended this place a lot and hadn't written outside of my house for quite a while. So this is called a reading of clouds. Someone says something about a storm. So I say, what better time to head out for a walk? My favorite walk. Each step allows me to see the stones again, allows me to feel a change, one I only know as a new season. Each look up at a vocal sky brings what I hear, what I question to know a sound I dare believe is a reading of clouds. Those ones I can't name. Those ones I see and have seen many times when my neck needs a workout. A reading of clouds, each gust like a language meant for me. Why I've spent a lifetime seeking what the sky is about and what I will never be a part of. Left to stare and talk out loud to the wind about whatever those clouds are named. Each one, all of them way above anything I might have been myself, or the other curious men I say are also locked to and led by unforgettable stories, often written about the land. So that's my poem for National Poetry Month. Now, is anybody here from Nova Scotia? No?
I lived there for a while.
It is quite a place to live, isn't it? Unfortunately, about 3 years ago, we had a mass murder take place. I'm sure you heard about it. So, of course, when horrific situations happen, at times the muse calls you, taps you on the shoulder, shoves you ahead to the pen and paper, whatever it is. So this is my poem, which I class as a memoriam. We see a lot of things on the TV called the breaking news. Well, I felt this mass shooting was the broken news. So that's the title of the poem. And I'm reading this in memory of the 22 people who were shot. And that's actually this weekend coming up. Page 22. I didn't plan that either, if you're wondering. So this is the broken news. In memory of those Colchester County lost April 18 and 19, 2020. It, all for a few moments, seems so far away. In another community, another province, another country. And then, in another few moments, it is right there in our stomachs, our hearts, and then down our cheeks. It, deserved of such a description, I will not say otherwise, other than it has paused the tides. And if you know anything about Nova Scotia, we're kind of known for our tides. Okay, so I'll read a few. Are we going long? How are we doing time-wise? I never like to go long. We're good to go, are we? Sometimes these poetry readings are like football matches. No one's planning on breaking out and fighting here, are they? The first thing I thought of was so funny. When I came in here, I thought of Bukowski sitting at the table. I don't know if it was UCLA or whatever it was. They used to put him at the desk because they didn't know if he could stand up. And then, of course, there'd be like bottles of Blue Nun and his beer that he loved, right? And of course, you know, an ashtray and everything. And I pictured him sitting here. It was the funniest thing. Because you don't often sit, you know, when you're giving readings. You know Bukowski, right? Sure you do. He's inspired a whole numerous generations of scribblers. Okay. Your city's clean. You need to be applauded. I'm telling you, it's wonderful. I live in a small community, and it's littered with these. Unfortunately, Tim's cup. Sometimes a walk within the ripening wild, other years when it was May, open both the active eyes of the man I still become to what I am willing to bet much on. Two different scenes connected by a dream. He, Tim Horton, far from the icy blue lines, seated at the unset kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee, as his gleaming spoon went round and round, seeing at least the first of the franchises. As for the other scene, my memory is on, one unseen in his steaming brew, as the famous morning as the famous morning poured into his eyes, fortunately unable to witness, unlike mine, his legendary name on each cup. Thrown from a truck, carried on a car roof, dropped by a drunk, left to be the litter in either the grass by the forest or in the forest, ending the fern, or right there underfoot every 10 feet. Regardless, I doubt the great player would want to be turning over in the grave where his career rests, with the knowledge fans were that forgetful. I should tell you a little history on that poem. It was published by Queen's Quarterly, and the only way that they would publish it and pay me $100 is if I dropped the last stanza. Think I did it? For $100, why not? There's not many lit bags left in this country that'll drop 100 on you. But I mean, that was when Joan Harcourt was still with them. Here's a poem for Gord Downie. We all know Gord Downie, right? Terrible loss. I've always loved Gord more as a poet than a singer, I will admit that. The Trust of a Robin on Sunday for Gord Downie. No other day than that day, I fed the crows beneath the flags, one for Nova Scotia and one for our country, Canada. The lone bird, 3 parking spaces down the paved, well-traipsed hill, sat in the shadows of trees known because of the season's kind teachings, and did not move or fly away all the time I was there, even when I stood still and stared at it. A robin, welcome. And it threw in that stare something I may never know about, our similar obvious lack of hurry. Perhaps the bird, simply brilliant enough to trust its decisions, to not allow me any superiority over the choice, its choice, to enjoy the day of rest, soon to endure the return to a more southern shade. Here's a poem I read yesterday during the workshop. We did a workshop, if you weren't there, called Seeing the Small. It's a place that I seem to be led to quite often. It's a big world out there at times, and sometimes there's nothing about it that wants to be written about other than the small and tiny. So this is called, and it's a short one, so hang in there. Short poems, damn them. The Little Pine. I think this is kind of, Blake came up yesterday, and I thought of this poem. It might be a bit Blakean, if I may. The Little Pine. To rest on a fallen tree in front of the little pine. All the time crows avoid the gull's theft, find all my hand served. I feel loneliness being helped. Dead needles are left. A courage to go on has returned. As a circle of melting ice surrounds the chubby trunk. I said last night, when you get a chance to have a word like chubby, you grab it. They're not coming often. Words. Here's a poem I really like reading. Dylan Thomas said to read the poems you like. Don't be afraid to read the poems you like, because there's probably just a few of them. And of course, you know, you think of some of Thomas's recordings and him reading Auden, like, oh my God, you know. This is called The Beauty of a Thistle. As the days of the week charge off somewhere, the early morning jaunts to the job provide a mind pondering what it is to know a blessing, to be blessed, to want blessedness. Almost thought after thought. As each step up the hill changes the thoughts to a curious surge throughout the body, perhaps a feeling coming on as the sun rises higher behind me, to allow the shade to remain just that, and the warming light to find and rest upon the purple of blooms. New growth as summer ages, as the choice now seems a wise one. The lawn needed cut. I chose to do the backyard first, being higher. As the blades one by one were lowered, the choice to go around the young thistle. Now understood, now being a sight of beauty, now being walked past, as a smile takes over my face and the dew dampens my old boots. I'm going to skip that one. Now this book, you can see it's myself seated on the cover, and it's in the Parental Forest, but I'm not supposed to be there. And the owner, she is featured in the next poem. She's a very mean woman. She never liked me using her little forest as a shortcut, and I did so all the time I held down a manufacturing job for 13 years. And the last time she spoke to me, and fortunately her house is up for sale, and I'm now walking through that forest again, but the last thing she said to me in a very mean way was, "Do you pay the taxes on this property?" What am I supposed to say to that? Well, I said, well, I have a new book out. It's written about your forest. I don't care about that. So yeah, we had this brief exchange. She just wouldn't listen to this wonderful story about this new book I have, written about her wonderful little forest. So anyways, this is a poem that I wrote. I didn't write it for her, but I think kind of, no, it's not even a vengeful inclusion. It's called The Branch Over the Path. This is actually written in 2011. A branch over the path. A certain morning has her, tending not only spring beds, but the path going through a property I used to find a way back to an old belief in shortcuts. A path I found based on directions another man shared, another man thought was an easier way home. Her name is Ruth, unmistakably kind, path owner of sorts, ready to leave the bulbs and soil in order to try and have me stop using the easy way to the job. I listened to her reasons, her voice nothing more than the cold morning, her voice never saying my choice to cut through the property she wants to take away from humans is a wrong choice. A choice I think resembles the deer's. How the does were the first to invade the forest. Ruth said is a piece of her family's privacy. No signs hang from the branch, and what would it matter? I have become a deer, and keep out wouldn't have caught my eye. I'll share one more. Oh, and by the way, I have some for sale in the next room too. This is the one I like to read too, because it was you have these magical times where strangers come into your life and you have no idea, other than it's a reason to be polite, and at this point why I was writing this poem was to explore. I know Canada the way I know Canada. I know it as a Canadian, but what is it like to have to leave your homeland or your country where you were born, and you make that choice, I'm going to Canada. I don't know anything about that. And that's another thing I love about poetry, is it allows me to explore my ignorance, the unknown. There's always something in there to be learned. And I love that type of mystery when education comes, but you don't know that that's part of it. So this is called Cling. A walk can be much more than a walk. I did not feel like a Viking on any unexplored shoreline. I did not feel like a voyeur behind a partly opened curtain. When I was about to pass her, one chilly, darkening afternoon, when I looked up from seeing how her child held his half-full bottle and noticed how the closest tree had one leaf left, I clearly understood we all cling in whatever ways we must to whatever will allow us to come together out on any street, out in any community, no matter the size. And such understanding came about due to the smile of this friendly mother, with her hair and head wrapped in a piece of material I don't need to name. Only, yes only, notice how it clings to a choice she must have made, back where she may have been born, when she was a girl who never knew. One day, on a sidewalk, miles into the future, she would share a certain hello with a thankful man born into this nation. She made another choice to come to. A home they are able to share under two different colored roofs. Thank you for having me.